Welcome, everybody. This week, you are going to absolutely love this episode with Luigi Prestinenzi. He is a he's not a sales guru, he is a sales practitioner. And I've known Luigi for a while, and he's super practical. So you are going to love this conversation. I have done other podcasts with sales experts, and we've been a bit more about maybe how to build sales teams and a bit more sort of overall sales process. This is like, if you are in a bind at the moment, I know a lot of founders who are finding it a bit tough in the current market conditions. Some of their opportunities have dried up. Big companies are kind of parking money, trying to reorganize their balance sheets, shedding staff, all sorts of stuff. So some people are finding it a bit tricky. In that environment, if you're the founder and you don't have a sales team, you need to be out there generating opportunities. But you may have never had any training in sales whatsoever. Like, how do you even go out to make connections on LinkedIn? Who should you be talking to? What do you say to them? How do you get into a conversation? You might see people who you could really help, but you'd actually just don't know how to activate it practically. So this is a walkthrough with a hypothetical business with Luigi, step by step. Like, what do you write? What do you say? How do you figure out who you're talking to? How do you figure out what their problems are? How do you make sure that you're talking to the right customers so you don't waste any of your time, you don't waste any of their time? This is a super practical walkthrough. So I strongly encourage you to listen all the way to the end. This is one it's going to go for a little bit longer than normal, not heaps longer, but you're going to want to take the time, get a pen and paper if you can, or just, screenshot it or whatever. And some of the really key bits, you're going to want to come back to this one and probably listen to key parts a few times. At the end of this, you will also going to get, if you go to the show notes, links directly to downloadable templates from Luigi that really helps you think through some of the key things that he talks about in his podcast. So make sure you go and have a look at the show notes so you can get all that stuff for free. Enjoy today's podcast. See you next week.
Welcome to the Scale Ups Podcast, where each week you get to hear Sean Steele, professional CEO, growth mentor, and advisory board chair, unpack the strategies that successful founders have used to achieve scale in their businesses. Stay tuned as he interviews the entrepreneurs who've made it, learns from industry experts, and follows a group of founders still striving to scale.
G'day, everyone, and welcome to the Scale Ups Podcast, where we help first-time founders learn the secrets of scaling so they can fulfill the potential of their businesses, make big decisions with greater confidence, and maximize the value and impact that they can create in the world. I'm your host, Sean Steele, and my guest today is Luigi Prestinenzi from Scalable Growth Podcast and the co-founder of the Growth Forum. How are you, mate?
Mate, I'm fantastic, Sean, and thanks for having me on your show. I know that this is we've been discussing this for a long time, so I'm so happy to finally get a seat on your podcast.
Me too. It's been a long time in the making, hasn't it? And you and I know each other really well. So in full disclosure, I've engaged you as a consultant on a number of occasions to help me build sales capability in different businesses. Most recently, in the Adventure Co Group, we had a big IT training business, and we had to do a full transformation of the sales environment, as I'm sure you remember, which ultimately was very successful, thanks to the effort of a lot of people in that business, and you really helped us kick that along in the early stages. So you, just quick background for the audience. So you were the co-founder of SalesIQ Global, which was, I guess, sales transformation, coaching, L&D, which you ran for like 9 years. And then for the last almost 5 years, you were running the SalesIQ podcast, which has now become the Scalable Growth Podcast. And you're the co-founder of a new business that you started in December last year called the Growth Forum, which is a community with content, collaboration, learning around sales, marketing, entrepreneurship, personal development. Am I kind of on?
Perfect.
I'm missing major bits?
Summary. Perfect summary. So it would have been 10 years in April when I started SalesIQ. So I sold my shares late last year. Wanted a bit of a change. It's just been an awesome. It's been an awesome journey since. I've been loving just exploring new ideas and growing a business from scratch again.
Well, I've been, obviously, because we know each other well. I've watched you for many years with the SalesIQ branding and all and everything that's gone with that, and it's been so cool to watch that transform into what you're doing now. And the reason I invited you here today, because people are kind of like, well, this is great, Sean and Luigi know each other, but why we're having this conversation? Well, I think your LinkedIn profile descriptor says it best. It says, I live and breathe sales. I'm not a guru. I'm a practitioner. I teach sellers the exact principles that I use to close 6, 7, and 8-figure deals. And that is why you are here today, because in our audience, we have lots of 7-figure founders who want to scale up to 8+. And that's what we help them do. But right now, in the current kind of market environment, there is a growing number, particularly those who service like larger, like kind of mid cap to large
Mm.
B2B clients. And those clients are really hurting in the current economic environment. And they're stopping projects and investments are being put on hold. And you can see,
Yeah.
people shedding staff and rebuilding cash reserves, and finance is expensive. And so there's a whole bunch of headwinds in a lot, not in every sector, but in a lot of sectors that's really flowing down into service based businesses who are servicing those people. And I notice,
Yeah.
I always say to people, if you've got a good business, like, if you basically can deliver stuff well, um, building a seven-figure business is not all that. I'm not saying it's easy. It's definitely not easy. But a
Yeah.
lot of people, once they've got a business model that's working and it's hitting a need and all the rest, they can often build into seven figures without actually amazing sales and marketing.
Mm.
Like, many businesses just get there because they just do a great job and people refer them and blah, blah, blah. But it's very difficult to break through eight figures and really scale a business without
Yeah.
good sales and marketing process,
Mm.
resources, systems, like proper people who do that for a job. And so what I was keen to do today was, I'm noticing people, like, all of a sudden the opportunity is drying up. All of a
Yeah.
sudden they look at their pipeline going, geez, this is not looking great for
Mm.
the next 6 to 12 months. And it's usually founders, usually owners, like directors of the business, who are all of a sudden the ones who have to go and drum up opportunities. And they
Yeah.
just actually have no idea where to start because they haven't had to do it before.
Yeah.
Um, and so today I was like, just like the practical things, like, who should I focus on? Do I focus on existing
Mm.
customers? Do I focus on building new relationships? Do I go back to people who've worked with us before but have completed? How do I re-engage these people in a conversation? Like, what
Mm.
do I do how do I rebuild the conversations that might lead to sales or opportunities when I haven't had to do that for some time?
Yeah.
And so it might feel a bit basic for you, but I think, people are really going to get a lot of value out of that today based on their audience.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, just on that topic, right, of founder-led sales, because a lot of businesses, if you think about it, when they start, the founder, regardless whether they've got sales experience or not, will ultimately go out and engage their first degree network when they're starting to get their first lot of sales, right?
Yeah.
And what often can create a bit of a false sense of security is that, hey, I've been able to achieve X number. Great. I should be able to, on this run rate, on this conversion rate, I should be able to grow my business now by 3 or 4 times, right?
Mm.
But then they hit a bit of a ceiling because they've exhausted their initial contacts and they haven't built that system, that scalable system, or the scale up system,
Mhm.
um, to be able to grow through that ceiling. And then when economic markets and the economic climate does get a bit tough, all of a sudden having those conversations with even your first degree contacts gets even harder, right?
Yeah.
So I think, for most businesses that are still founder led or directors, they're trying to get to the 7 to 8 figure number. I think there's absolute merit in not just coming up with strategies for themselves to drive revenue, but thinking about, how do I create a proper system here that
Mm.
is not dependent on me either, right? I can actually
Yeah.
plug somebody else into this system so it can grow without my attention and energy on it.
100%. And,
Mm.
guaranteed they're also being hit up by, VA companies and stuff every day
Mm.
who are like, oh, we can generate leads for you on LinkedIn and all the rest. And they're just, but they're,
Yeah.
and which I'm not saying is a bad thing, but they don't know where to start because they haven't, the foundations aren't laid yet. So it's
Yeah.
like, well, how would you use that to amplify something that doesn't exist today? Like, they're not going to come up with a
Mm.
great sales,
Yeah.
methodology or system. So where would you encourage them to start? Like, how should they think about, who should they start with? Or, what's the starting point?
So this is a great question, and regardless, like, I've had the pleasure, and I'm still coaching a number of people, from the HubSpots, from Stripes, of some really big orgs to some smaller orgs, right? And there's a common challenge that I see occur when pipeline is not where it needs to be, or
Mhm.
opportunities aren't, flowing through your pipeline. Often it's where they're spending their time. And if we think about it, especially if you're a founder, right, or if you're a director of a business, you don't have an abundance of time because you're not just running
Yeah.
sales, but you're probably looking at operations, you're probably doing
Mhm.
accounting. There's a whole range of
Yeah.
things. So your focus is diluted. Um, so you've got to be careful not to spend your time selling to the wrong type of customers.
Mm.
And if I look at just salespeople, the statistics show a seller spending an average of about 32% of their time actually selling. Now, if they
Right.
use that time, the limited time that they've got, focusing their attention on the wrong type of customers, what's happening is, and again, the data shows this, 50% of people's pipeline is filled with the wrong type of customers. There's not a good fit there. Yeah.
Yeah.
So the first thing we need to do is go back a step and really give consideration to who is our target audience, like who is our ideal customer, or ideal account profile. So go, well, if I'm targeting mid-market businesses, which mid-market? It's not
Yeah.
everybody. Not
Yeah.
everybody is right for our product or service.
Mm.
And by just taking the time to do that exercise, and I'm doing this with a very large professional services firm at the moment, by allowing them to get laser focused and get really, intentional with who they want to serve, the problems that that particular sector is going through, and they know that they can help them and
Yeah.
achieve a particular outcome, it
Yeah.
allows them to get laser focused.
Mm.
And then the next step is to give consideration to who are the people in the buying committee within that organization that need to be part of the conversation.
Yeah.
And then once you've got that, you're laying the foundation. That's foundational, right? Because if you don't lay that foundation, what happens is it's like just throwing darts at a dartboard and hoping it lands and hoping you hit your target. And
Yeah.
hope is not a strategy, right? So
Mm.
you have to get that foundational. You've got to get that foundation in place first, because otherwise it's a bit of a house of cards.
So why don't we take an example as we kind of roll through the
Yep.
practical steps? Because I think that might make it easier for people to get their heads around. So let's just say we've got a consulting business where we do, I don't know, like Microsoft Dynamics. Let's say we're basically working on
Yep.
like CRMs, right? So we do integrations and
Yep.
implementations, and we help optimize. And so there are to your point, that's a great example of a service that can be used in lots of different,
Yep.
in good times where they might, the clients might be really focused on sales and marketing and acquiring customers and all the rest. And so that might be a kind of key concern for them.
Mm.
But also in tough times, what might they be spending money on, or what could they spend money on inside that environment where they've got different problems? They might be trying to shed
Yep.
staff, they might be trying to automate, workflows to reduce headcount, or there's
Yep.
a million other things. So let's imagine that's what we do, and we've figured out that our key audience is, I don't know, financial lenders,
Yep.
right? Like, lenders are our kind of key client inside financial services sector, and we think they've got some real challenges
Yep.
at the moment. Why don't we start there? So let's assume we've got to
Perfect.
that stage.
Yeah. So the first thing we've got to do, we've got to make sure that the audience does have a problem that we can help solve. Because if there's no problem, there's no sale, right? What's the purpose
Mm,
of us having a conversation if there's no problem in their business that's causing them concern, right?
yeah.
So when we do our assessment, we're saying, hey, we're looking at this particular sector and we know that, 80% of that sector is experiencing X problem, and we have a
Yeah.
solution that can help them. That's the kind of the first thing we need to define, right? The
Mm,
second thing, when we're actually looking at that sector, is saying what part of that sector has an appetite for what we sell. Because, for example, you talk about Microsoft,
yeah.
there is a portion of that market that's Salesforce would be absolutely, immersed in that business. And it's not just
Yes.
Salesforce. They've got, we know that if you've got Salesforce, there's probably 6 or 7 other pieces of tech that's connecting into
Hmm.
Salesforce to get it
Yeah.
run optimal.
Yeah.
So you've got to ask yourself, if I target customers that are Salesforce, it's a Salesforce shop, the probability of them changing
Mm,
might be low.
pretty
Now,
low.
I'm
Yeah.
not saying you ignore them, but from a pursuit perspective, there's probably other people within that sector that are not in that position. And so
Mm,
we think about our ideal customer and say, well, actually, I want to talk to businesses that haven't gone full suite, you know, huge CRM. They might not have the whole process automated. They might have a couple of systems that they've sort of connected together, but it's not
yeah.
working to the way it needs to be. That looks like more of an ideal customer for me
Hmm.
than somebody that's, completely got Salesforce or HubSpot, etc., in place,
Yeah.
right? Or they might be using Microsoft Teams, they might be using Office 365, but they're not taking advantage of, deeper integration. So
Mm,
they're the sorts of things that you need to process from a thought perspective and start to really add into your ideal customer profile or ideal account profile first,
Yeah.
because then when you start to build your list, right, and start to go, okay, well, I need to actually build a target list to start to engage with them. Regardless whether you're doing inbound or outbound, the same process applies.
Yeah.
I've got to get clear on who they are, and then I'll start to develop my strategy on how do I actually get them into my funnel, right?
Yeah.
So that's the very first step that I'll do, because again, otherwise what happens is you go out to a larger audience. Again, if
Mm.
you're spending money on paid ads or you're proactively reaching out through a sales development process, your message won't resonate
Yeah.
because you're trying to go too wide. So again, this is about niching. This is about getting very narrow in our
Mm.
focus and going, yeah, the addressable market for this sector, CRM, could be, there could be a million, 10,000 customers. The
Mm.
reality is there's probably 1,000 that's right for us. So let's
Yeah.
focus our attention on the 1,000,
Yeah.
and let's not ignore the 9,000, but
Mm.
that's a longer term play. Yeah.
Yeah.
That it's going to take a lot more time to educate them. And we have to kind of wait for the time that it's a right time, because it has to
Mhm.
be a compelling reason. And as you know, changing a CRM, that's a big process,
Yeah.
right? It's
So
a
would
change
they
management process.
so let's say, in this circumstance, they wanted to go after people maybe who'd done a Dynamics implementation, or to your point,
Mm.
hadn't gone for a full suite CRM that was connecting
Yep.
everything together, and so it was a bit sort of bit hodgepodge. So probably maybe smaller end of the market, less sophisticated lenders who therefore kind of got that gap and that
Yep.
problem. How would they go about? How do you figure out that that's the customer? Like how do you find those people? How do you coach clients to find those people?
So and again, going back a step, what we do is we look at the customers that look like that in our own database, the ones that we're currently serving as
Yeah.
well,
Okay. Hmm.
because that'll we'll get a lot of information. So
Mm.
go to your existing, if you're an established business, which this particular case study they are, you would already have customers that look like that, so you can pull a lot of information and data about improvements, what's worked well, etc.
Hmm.
So that's the first step, because you've got to then develop your message, right? You've got to get very clear about, when I do start to reach out to these customers, that I have to have a message that creates interest and desire
Yeah.
for them to take action, right?
Yeah.
Um, and so again, if we go back, we develop an ICP, so we get clear on the customer profile. We then identify who are the people within that account that we want to talk to. Is it the CFO? Is it the head of IT? Is it the head of sales or head of marketing? Depending on our strategy for pursuit. So, for example, if we know that the lender can, by bringing that marketing automation component in from a CRM, can actually drop their cost per acquisition and,
Hmm.
et cetera, then maybe our pursuit is through the marketing team, right?
Yeah. Hmm.
Or if it's sales and we know that the lender can actually speed up the sales process and increase
Yeah.
conversion, maybe we go to the head of sales, right?
Hmm.
Because it's not always IT that drives the
Mm.
initiatives. It's coming
Yeah.
from, and this back in your
Which
days of
problem's being
running major
solved?
corp.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
It's usually
Well, yeah.
somebody
That I mean,
within,
that's a perfect example. As a
yeah,
person running sales and marketing, the sales people would come to me because there was a sales development
problem.
opportunity that we're going to the CTO. I would
Yeah,
engage the CTO and go, "Hey, let's look at this together." But they're
correct.
coming to me because I'm the one with the problem or the upside or the benefit.
Yeah. So that's why it's important to you give thought to that before you start to reach out to them.
Yeah.
And, whether it's on LinkedIn, doesn't matter which channel you use,
Yeah.
you've got to get clear on, well, what's my purpose of my reach out, and
Yeah.
how does it benefit them? So,
Mm.
so once we go through that process, then it's about establishing the right message and really giving consideration and saying, okay, let's think about and it's you've really got to hypothesize the problem, because until you're in there, you
So let's
can't
hypothesize
validate.
one now,
Yeah,
just to kind of help us along. Um,
and you're putting
so
me under the
we, yeah,
spot.
no, that's all right. We'll do it together. We'll figure it out.
Yeah,
So we've got this Dynamics business. We've got some good case studies of where we've been able to help other clients drop their cost of acquisition, and because
yep,
it's a bit of a tough market. Maybe 6 months, 12 months ago, they were just not that concerned about cost of acquisition
yep,
because they were just spending crazily, and they're like, there's just money everywhere. Now all of a sudden, money's getting tight. They're going, geez, we actually really need to
yep,
refine the sales and marketing, features or elements of the way we do our, the way our CRM supports our sales and marketing processes, that we can bring our cost of acquisition down. And as a service provider, we've got good examples of where we've done this before,
Yeah.
and we've got good testimonials and results and outcomes. Let's say we've got some kind of case studies, if you like, kind of lined up. So we know what we're doing, and so we're not making it up. So we know
Yeah.
there's a problem. We know who the client is, which is going to be head of marketing or sales, I guess,
Yep.
depending on, it's going to be one of those two. And we know we've got some experience in the background. What do we do next?
Well, we've got to do a little bit of research first, right? So we need to start to look at that list and say, great, now that I've got my list built out, and I think this is a really good target list, I'm going to conduct a bit of research first. I'm going to have a look, because there are ways in which we can see how does a business operate. I might jump on their site. I might have a look at their payment, if they've got an e-com portal, website. There's certain things that I'm looking for that tell me that there's potentially a problem that aligns with what we do, right? So we do a little bit of
Okay.
research first, because again, if we can do that little bit of research, when we create the message, it's highly relevant for them, right?
Yeah.
Now there are
So just
things
as a simple example,
yeah,
if one of the things that we've used successfully is, I don't know, chat,
yeah,
like chat as part of the conversion process on the site, and that integrates with the CRM, and it's being triggered by the fact that someone's been there for 2 minutes and
yep.
there's a pop-up and so on. And we go to their site and we go, oh, they don't
There's
actually
no
have chat
chat.
integrated. That's interesting.
Yeah,
So we're thinking, well, there's something
there's
insightful
a
about this
gap.
customer. There's a gap
Yeah,
already. Yeah.
yeah. So that's a key for us. We need to define what are some of the gaps, right? And look,
Mhm.
if there are some other things that you'd look for, some triggers that you'd also look for as well that would make your message even more relevant. But the first thing is just to define, okay,
Like what? What are you thinking about there, Luigi?
so triggers are like, there are some triggers that you always want to look out for. Announcements. So for example, if you know that a company's releasing a new product, that's a trigger, because you're like,
Okay.
okay, the new product they're trying to grow, entering a
Yeah.
new market. The
Mm-hmm.
CFO or head of sales, somebody in a key role changes, because we know,
Mm,
think about when you first became CEO, what
yeah.
did you do the first 90 days? You did your assessment on the business to find the quick wins. So you're open to discussing change,
Yeah.
right?
Yes. Yeah.
Um, so there are things, or it could be economic, interest rates have gone up, cash could be harder to get. That's a trigger. It's like, okay, now
Mm-hmm.
they've got to get smarter. In the tech sector, we knew that 12 months ago, the valuations of tech were
Sky high.
overinflated.
Yeah.
So it was growth that it didn't matter. They just wanted to grow. Now we can't just grow at all costs. It's got to be sustainable, profitable growth.
Yeah.
So things have changed, right? So
Mm.
there's some of the things that we're thinking about. But when we actually go and say, right, we've got our list, we're going to establish the message. The one thing that we've got to try to avoid is leading with a feature-led statement. It's not
Mm.
about us. And if we think of top of
Which
funnel,
sounds like
right?
what?
Oh, we have a product that does this, and it can, and these are the features, like a chatbot.
Yeah. Hi,
Because
John. We haven't met before. I run
yeah,
a Microsoft Dynamics consultancy, and we've had some great success with other clients in helping them reduce their cost of acquisition by implementing chat.
yeah. See, that's actually not too bad, right? Because you've said
Okay.
we've helped other companies drop acquisition, because that's an outcome.
Okay. That's an okay. Yeah.
But you don't talk about the product in that, and it's really important to say, hey, John, I've just recently been on your site, and I've been having a bit of a mystery shop of your customer experience, and I've actually got some insight I'd love to share about how you could reduce your cost per acquisition and also turn more site visitors into paying customers. Right?
Mm.
Would now work to chat, or when did you want to put some time in the calendar?
Yeah.
Now, what it'll do, it'll pique the prospect. They're going, oh, hang on, you've taken the time to research me. So the key thing to that is you've showed them that you know them.
Mm-hmm.
You're also, um, earning the right to have a conversation, and
Yeah.
then you're leading with the word insight. So remember,
Mm.
establishing a really good point of view, or your message, it's based on business outcomes. So think of a venn: business
Yeah.
outcomes, pains, and your insight and expertise.
Right.
Right. So
Mm-hmm.
when you think about that structure and you create a point of view to say, I've got some insight about this that can help you achieve X, it's going to go, okay, well, tell me more, right?
Mm.
Because the purpose of reaching out to new prospects is not to sell anything. It's just to start a conversation, because you're at that
Mm.
pre-contemplation awareness stage. You're
Yeah.
trying to create awareness.
Yeah.
And the conversation has to be around, there's got to be an exchange of value for time. So the first thing a customer, first thing John's thinking is, what value will I get if I give you time?
Mm.
Right? And the value has to be, I can teach you something that you don't know,
Mm.
right? Because I'm an expert. I've worked with, hundreds of companies implementing CRMs. I see hundreds of sales processes, marketing processes. I see where they lose money. I see where they make money. That's insight.
Mm.
John sees things from John's perspective in the one company.
Yeah.
I have a sort of an eagle eye view, right?
Mm.
So that's insight. And if I can distill that in a really clever message and say, oh, I can share this with you. And then when I'm in that meeting, let's discuss, is this actually a problem and how is it impacting you? What happens is the
Mm.
gap becomes real, right?
Yeah.
And then we've got a current and a future state gap. And then we can start to talk about, well, let me show you how others are fixing this problem. And would it make sense for us to maybe, discover further if this problem's even worth investing in and tackling, right?
Mm.
So, and it goes all the way back to that very first interaction you have with the organization. But that's the big, and it's funny, when I changed roles, and I posted about this on LinkedIn, as of the end of Feb, I think it was end of Feb, I had 101 emails of people reaching out to me in under 2 months, right? That's not even in my junk mail, by the way, Sean, because they were using a trigger. They were looking for triggers on, because there's automation that does this,
Mm.
a job change. And if I show you the emails, and out of the 101 emails, only one of them personalized. The rest were generic. We've got VAs, we do lead gen, we do this, we
Mm.
do that, cybersecurity. None of them were talking about the outcomes that were important to me. They were just feature dump.
Yeah.
One person personalized. And they all were sequenced because they've got a sequencing tool. They're
Mm.
just jamming it in. And
Mhm.
so think about, that's what you're competing with. You're competing with other people sending poorly crafted messages and jamming people's inboxes. And the average person gets about 131 emails a day, right? And you don't want your email, if you are emailing as part of your prospecting strategy, you don't want your email to be clustered with all the other stuff that they're getting that's feature focused, because you don't have time. Remember when you were CEO of Adventure Co, you don't have time to read through and go, features, I don't need this. I don't
Yeah.
need another tool. I don't need another
Uh,
service product. What I do
yeah. You
need,
don't get. I mean, you usually have your little, Outlook or whatever tool you're using. You usually got like what, about 10 words that you see, and you judge the email on the 10 words, and you're
that's
like,
right.
no, just
Yeah,
delete or mark as read or
correct.
whatever. So would you? Okay, so let's take a step back, because you jammed a hell of a lot of value very quickly into
Yeah.
that little piece, which is, I think, that hot, that key frames that you talked about there. One is kind of earning the right, and
Yep.
the fact that you can show that you've actually done some research. Number one, you can building credibility. Two, that you've got some insight that they might
Yep.
find valuable, that's linked to an outcome that they're likely to care about in
Yep.
the current context, given their company, given the environment, and all the rest. And then inviting them to a discussion. Would you do this if you didn't know the person, and therefore, for example, you actually had to make a LinkedIn connection first? Would this be like, would you put this in, how when you go to connect on LinkedIn, if you don't know them, you can add a note? Would you be putting this in the note with the connection, or like, how do you, if you don't have the connection already, how would you do
Yeah,
that?
that's a great question. So, and I answer this in two ways, and I'll explain why. Because I want people, your audience, to think of their funnel. We all know sales funnels, right? Or marketing funnels, whichever way you want to call it. I want them to break their funnel into two. One's what we call the sales funnel, and one's the relationship funnel. And I'll explain the difference
Okay.
on the two funnels in a moment. But when we're looking for certain attributes and certain triggers, there things will pop up that go, right, this is the right time for me to have a chat with you. That's going to go into my sales funnel immediately. And my intention when I reach out to you is, I want to talk to you. So
Mm.
there's nothing wrong with saying, hey, Sean, I'm connecting. I just was on your site. I noticed X. I've actually got some insight. I'd love to connect and share this with you.
Mm.
Now, there's nothing wrong with that. And if they accept it, they're like, yeah, I'm open to hearing that insight. Then it's about, hey, thanks for accepting. You might drop a voice note. If your audience don't know, you can do voice notes on LinkedIn. You can send a
Mm,
video,
mm,
enrich the process. Yeah. Another
mm,
another powerful stat, just to talk about why you want to enrich the process, is what influences buyers. 54% is the experience to have with the sales process. 18% is the product and service, and 18% is brand, and 9% is price. So the experience you create in the sales process matters. So
mm.
doing things like sending a voice note, sending a video, right? It
Yeah.
matters, right? Because you're bringing a human element to the process. So I wouldn't.
And people, by the way, I mean, I don't know about you, but uh, because I've been given that suggestion before and I'm only just sort of starting to do it now. But when you think about it, how many other people do that? That, you know, you've got the opportunity to
Yeah,
humanize the person, and it doesn't need to be a perfectly filmed video, right? Like the fact that it's
no,
authentic, it's like people
on
aren't
your
expecting that
phone.
anymore. Yeah,
Correct. I,
just
I, I
do it on your
surveyed.
phone, wherever you are, in a
Yeah.
hallway, like outside, doesn't matter.
It's funny, I surveyed a whole bunch of buyers. This got a bit about 30. How many videos you get? It's like under 5% of them are getting,
Mm,
videos in their email. So this is just something I want them to think about, like your audience, is that
yeah.
regardless of what medium, if you're on the phone, if it's an email, if it's a LinkedIn note, if it's a letter, right? If it's a whatever it is, right? A pigeon with a
Mm,
note. Just don't be afraid. If you've noticed something and it's relevant, they'll be open to engaging with that message. And if they don't,
mm,
that's okay, right? You can still be persistent. You can be respectfully persistent, and you might try another channel. That's the other thing. In 2023, we can't be single channel dependent. So
right.
we can't just be dependent. Like if your only strategy is LinkedIn, you're missing out on major opportunity. And the data actually backs this up. The more channels that
So
you
let's
use,
so let's
yep,
just take that as an example. You know, the head of the marketing, the head of the marketing department and the financier, they've accepted our connection.
yep,
And you know, maybe that was our little sort of pitch was in the note. You know, it's now
yep,
sitting there at LinkedIn. We said, hey, we'd love to, like, when would be a good time to set this up? You know, here's my Calendly link, or you know, give me your Calendly link, or whatever
yeah.
it is. And then you get a nothing response, and you're thinking, okay, we're gonna have to either come back
Yeah.
or I'm gonna have to try another channel. How would you have access to another channel? How would you think about that?
So again, we're in a really great from I tell you why I love selling in 2023, right? Because um, I'm 40. I'm turning 41. I feel like I loved saying I was under 40, right?
Welcome to the club.
Yeah. But
The
when I
40s.
first, yeah, because I've been selling my whole life, right? I remember when I first started, we didn't have this incredible platform called LinkedIn where you could find, who is the person responsible for X function. Yeah. You'd
Mm.
have to do it the old school way. You'd have to,
Gatekeepers.
drive down a street, write
Yeah.
the name down, go back to call the receptionist. Hey, can I speak? And
Yeah.
then try strategy two.
Yeah.
But now
Call
we
them
can
back with
lick.
another voice, you know, like call them with one voice to get the name and then call back with a different voice to get
Yeah. Or you'd have to go to a networking event and try to meet the person and get their
Yeah.
business card and then call them on the Monday after the footy event. But
Yeah.
what we've got now, you can literally in Sales Navigator or LinkedIn, you can find the profile. There are tools that you can click a button and you get a mobile number, an email address. So you can
So does Sales
just
Navigator give you the email address and the mobile number, or you have to pay for a third party
no,
tool?
there's a
Or
tool called, I'm going to advocate a tool, a client that I work with, right? So Lucia, they're a Tel Aviv, they're from Israel, incredible platform. I've been using it for a couple of years. It's
okay.
just a Google Chrome extension.
Yeah.
Um, and it'll literally just pop up their details on the side panel and it'll give you mobile, email address, information on the
Wow.
company. It's amazing, right? If you haven't got that as
Cool.
part of your stack and you're trying to grow your business, you need to
Mm.
get it, right?
Yeah.
So, and full disclosure, I've trained their team globally. So,
Hmm.
and because I love the platform. It's helped me win so much business. But,
Yeah.
um, one thing that we have to get used to when selling is get used to silence,
Yeah.
because we might reach out to someone and they go, yeah, sure, they accept a connection request, and then we might send it again and we don't get a response. We're like, what's going on? But I just want us to, we always got to put ourselves in the position of the buyer and say, the buyer, when they open a message, and think of our own, when we see a text message or an email, we're often doing something else. And we
Mm.
see it, but we forget about it because we go back to what we were doing. And then another 3 or 4 messages have come through.
Yeah. Just
And
slides
then
down.
before too long, they've forgotten.
Mm.
So you have to follow up. And it could be, and I, the follow up can't just be, hey, following up on my last message. It could be something like, hey, I know that this is what I wanted to share. Um, Here's a bit of value about X that I think you might find valuable. When works for us to connect? Yeah,
Mm.
just drip a little bit more value into it. Send a text message. 93% of text messages are read within 3 minutes. Yeah. And so many people don't use text messages.
Do
So
you
so
get people, because I don't know how many people on LinkedIn realize that their mobile number is accessible through a tool like Lucia. So do you get people who kind of go, well, how'd you get my number? Like,
yeah, sometimes, and you know what? I use that because I sell to sales leaders. Whenever they said that to me, I'm like, well, this is why you need to meet with me, because if your team aren't accessing numbers, then they're not generating enough leads. It'd be like, okay, let's meet. So, and you
yeah,
sometimes get it, but that's when you need to be. I'm a big fan, and you know me, Sean. Transparency, honesty,
yeah,
their integrity, they're the values in which we sell. You got to be honest. You say, hey, that's a great
yeah,
question. I actually use a tool that integrates with LinkedIn
mm,
to get this information, and it's all
yeah,
ethically sourced data. So
yeah,
they're like, okay, cool. And you know what, people are aware of AI and stuff, and I haven't really had. I mean, when I called the CEO of NAB, he got very upset with me when he answered the phone. But outside of Andrew Thorburn, not many people get too upset with me. So yeah,
that's good. Yeah, I like that. Okay, so we have, let's assume now we've gone through LinkedIn, we've reached out, we've established, what was the Venn
Mhm.
diagram again? Insight, what were the other two?
So if you think of the 3 circles, you've got business
Yeah,
outcomes at the top,
yeah,
pains, so the pain and the problem on the
yeah.
right, and your insight and expertise, and in the middle is your point of view, right?
Okay,
Um,
yeah,
so that's how, because you want to, and your point of view needs to cover three. So
yeah,
you're leading with, I noticed X about your business. I have some insight about how you could mitigate X problem and achieve X outcome,
yeah,
and love to share this insight. And you can even social proof it by saying, and we've worked with other companies like ABX Proprietary Limited and achieved great results. Is it worth a chat? Right.
yeah,
And it's
yeah.
a soft approach, but that's a framework you can apply on the phone. You can then
Mm,
back that framework up, and I can send you a structured template for this.
mm-hmm.
And then you can back that up on email, right? But again, what's key to this is you're not leading with what you do, you're leading with what's important to the prospect and to the buyer,
Yeah,
right?
yeah,
And
got it. Yeah,
even inbound,
fantastic.
there's a lot of companies talk about inbounds, the holy grail. It's the only way. And I see this so many times. Companies spend money to acquire inbound, and then the first thing they do to respond to inbound is, let's just drop all the features of our product into your inbox, and let's just try to sell our product. But again, just because they've asked for a callback, it doesn't mean they're ready to
Yeah,
buy.
yeah,
It's your job to kind of, again, lead with outcomes, talk about
yeah.
problems, and start to establish, what does the scope and the business case need to look like to turn this into an actual, closed opportunity.
So if you were then going to give somebody the frame, obviously we've only got a certain amount of time, but kind of the frame of that first
Yeah.
conversation. So they've now got the meeting, right? The person goes,
Yeah.
"Hey, cool, let's chat."
Yeah.
What's the frame of that meeting?
So the frame up of the meeting, and I've got a very specific structure for the first meeting, because I lead with, my message is about, I'm leading with an insight I want to share. I want to give value first. So I can't start the meeting by saying, hey, thanks, Sean, for taking the time to meet with me today. So what's going on in your business? Like, what are the
Yeah, they're
problems?
like, "Hang
Blah,
on a
blah,
second,
blah.
where's the insight?"
Because you're looking for value first, right? So
Yeah,
obviously you set your agenda, and then you say, hey, when we spoke, I mentioned working with a whole bunch of organizations. These are some of the trends that we're seeing. This is what's impacting performance. This is how X is happening. And these are some of the things that we're seeing companies do to mitigate X and achieve B by doing A, B, C. And they're like,
mhm,
oh, okay. and they're thinking, because what you want them to do in order to have a successful first meeting, a new pattern of thinking needs to occur, right? So once you start to drop that insight, then you can ask a question on the back of that insight to say, hey, based on what I've shared, how is this current trend or problem impacting your business? And then what happens is the relationship tension drops. They're thinking a little bit differently. They're hearing stuff. They're going, well, this is how it's impacting me. And then the discovery starts to occur. And then you start to ask questions and they share, you drill down, because that conversation, it should be a
Mm.
dialogue, not a monologue. And I
Yeah,
see a lot of
absolutely.
salespeople go into meetings, even founders will go into a meeting and they do the show up and throw up. So let me show everything about me, and it's a monologue. It's me
Yeah,
talking and you're listening, and I hope something sticks. It's got to be a
yeah,
dialogue, right?
yeah.
So the premise of the first meeting is to share insight, get them thinking, and get them into a point of, you know what, this is problematic for me.
Mm,
Maybe it's worth investigating further. Now, I'm not
mm,
talking about transactional sales here, right? And you know
mm.
me, I've
Yeah,
sold 30 grand deals to just under $20
yeah.
million transformational deals. So I'm
Mm,
talking about, you know, deals that require multiple people. It's going to
yeah.
require multiple meetings before you get to a
Mm,
point of close.
mm.
They've got to be able to think a little bit differently, assess that there is a problem worth investigating, and then we'll start to build a business case around it to
Yeah,
quantify, is this worth our time and money to make
yeah,
this happen, right?
yeah. That's so good. And when because the thing that I notice with founder psychology is when they get to a situation like this, they go, "But I hate selling, and I hate people selling to
Mm.
me, and I don't know how to sell." And I'm like, "Yo, your job is not to like
No.
if you think selling is like calling people and telling them they need to take stuff, then
Yeah.
that is upside down. Like selling is a service. And you have no idea whether you've even got what they need until you
Yeah.
actually get to the point of understanding the pain points and the
Yeah.
problem. So forget it. Like just put your detective hat on. Like your job. So
Absolutely.
that excludes the whole frame of like getting to the meeting. But once you're in that meeting, like get your detective hat on. Like, do
Yeah.
you see a detective in a in like a documentary series or something you watch on Netflix? Ask three questions and then go, "Yep, I've got it. Yep, this is what happened."
Yeah.
No, they're like dog at a bone
They
because
got
they
to.
know until they fully understand all the context and the pieces and all the elements where they don't have a hypothesis. And so how can you have a hypothesis when you don't actually fully understand the problem yet, how it's impacting them, and then whether you actually have the right solution? And that stage, then all your job is explain it, right? It's
Yeah.
like it takes the kind of weight
Absolutely,
off
and I
selling, if
love
you
that
like.
analogy, and I also use a doctor's analogy, right? Like if you wouldn't go into a doctor's surgery and go into his room, and the doctor starts saying, "Hey, check out all my degrees I've got behind me. Look at all the awards. Have a look at all the drugs that the pharmaceutical companies are trying to pump right now. Which one do you want?" Right? He'd be like, "Well, you you
Yeah,
go there because you've got a potential problem you don't know the answer for, and the first thing the
yeah,
doctor's got to do is a bit of due diligence to sort of think about,
yeah,
can I identify it first? And if I can't, I'm going to do
yeah,
further tests to identify." So I
yeah,
always like that example, because if we're in sales and we're diagnosing something, without actually doing an investigation, it's malpractice, right? So
mm,
that's another thing. And the other thing is, for founders, because I've worked with a lot of, people that are not salespeople as well, their relationship with sales is based on the experiences they've had before being sold to in a
yeah,
very, car, real estate,
yeah,
like it's the least trusted profession.
yeah.
I think the only other profession that's least trusted is politician at the moment, right? But it's
Mm,
it's in the bottom three, sales. So their relationship is based on the experience that I've had before. Where I want your listeners to really think about changing that mindset and perspective, sales is about helping, educating, nurturing, problem solving, being creative. They're the key elements that make up a great sales process. And
mm,
when we're doing that, we're not having to force our product on anybody, because we're helping our
totally.
buyer really uncover what's possible, right? So
Yeah.
I think if that's probably my biggest takeaway for founders that are looking to really
Mm,
try to scale and then build an operating system, a sales operating system for people to take on board, it's got to be value driven as well. It's got to be, strong values that underpin your sales process. That's what's going to drive sustainable outcomes.
Have you seen? So let's just say there's a founder who's done that, who's now doing this well. Okay, so they've
Mm.
gone into whether it's current customers they're trying to re-engage with or previous customers. Like, I always think, well, if you're in a tight position and you need to generate opportunities quickly, the starting point is going to be places where people already know who you are because the
Yeah.
credibility factor's already there. So that might, you're going to run out of that at some point, but
Yeah.
sensible starting point. How do, and then, this clearly works well, certainly for going out to new, prospective
Yeah.
clients. But so my question is the scalability of that as a system. If you're a founder and you're like, well, I don't need like thousands of appointments, but I would love to have more meetings than I've got time
Mm.
to do this process with. Have you seen people succeed in taking on a VA or a part-time? Like, how would you get someone? Because there's a clear tailoring
Yeah.
and level of consciousness and intelligence and language capability and all the other stuff that goes into doing this well. Have you seen people find a way to scale that a little? Would not scale it like massively, but like a
Yeah.
bit to accelerate.
I have, but I've seen them scale up like a part, like could be the list building process. It could be,
Right. Yeah.
think about, like, I want you to think about revenue raising activities versus low revenue raising activities, like your high payoff
Mm,
principles, low payoff, right? Um, I think, and especially in markets like Australia, I mean, I train Asia, Europe, US. I've had the pleasure of seeing most markets. In Australia, we don't like contact centers and people from Asia calling. Like this, it's not a
mm,
a racial comment. It's just for some reason
mm,
it's not received well, right? Um, and to be honest, my opinion on this is get you can use a VA to do certain parts. Like I said, the laborious parts, the list building, the data enrichment. Absolutely, if you want to outsource that, do it. But if you're trying to build a scalable system and you haven't got a team in place, there's a lot of merit in doing it and actually setting that system up, because you need to learn the process or bringing someone that can help build that process. Because if you
yeah.
put people into it and the process isn't developed, it breaks,
Mate,
right?
I'm so with you. I'd like the number of people I have seen, and I'm sure you have seen many more than I have, who think I'm going to hire a salesperson and they're going to bring all that with them.
No, not going to happen.
Papa, incorrect.
So, no,
You're not going to hire a sales development rep who's got a perfect sales process that's purpose fit for your business, who has the right, like people have to
no,
be
not going to
trained.
work, right?
So to your point, either get an expert to help you or figure it out yourself,
Yeah.
like do the learning, figure out how to do it, get it right, and then train somebody else, and you can always bring somebody else in later.
Correct. Process map it, think about the
Yeah.
bottleneck, etc. But I would be reluctant to use an outsourced VA. Look, there are outsourced, sales development services in Australia, for example, and
Yes.
globally, that are very good at what they do because they only do top of funnel. But then you've still
Mm,
got to have a system to take the lead from that discovery to point of decision. And, if you are trying to scale your business, you're probably not trying to scale it over the next 3 months. You're looking for 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 years growth. Take the
mm,
time to invest and getting that process done now, because you'll actually see there'll be a point where once it's going, it's like a hockey stick, right?
mm.
It'll start to really accelerate. So that's my biggest piece of advice. But for founders right now, just I know that we're coming to an end, but for founders right now, what I would say is, if growth is high on your priority list, the best thing to do right now is get proactive and start reaching out to your target market. Because if you don't do it now, the 90-day pipeline, it'll just look horrible, and then they'll get themselves into a real rut, and
Yeah.
panic mode will kick in, anxiety will kick in, and then the
Mm,
next 90 days after that, it'll just look even worse, right?
yeah.
And the best time to start is now.
100%. But I've really enjoyed this conversation, and you and I could just spend all day, playing with the practicalities and the details and the tactics in the sales process, because it's really fun, and I know it's super valuable for. But it's a podcast, and at some point you've got to shut it down, right? So
Yeah.
people won't listen. People won't listen forever. But that
Yeah.
has been massively, massively practical and tactical, which is exactly what I think right now
Yeah.
founders who are in that position, they don't have time to go and hire somebody else. They like need to do something, do something now. Here's a great way of getting you started with much better frames that are really going to increase your chance of success. Get started. You've got network there. Like, go and start leveraging the network that you've already got. You've probably got 3,000 or 5,000 or 10,000 followers and people who you've never actually spoken to before, but have had some kind of the details are available to you. Go and pay your $150 a month or whatever it is for Sales Navigator and get onto it. Like, it's not crazy money.
And I'll give you one quick hack and takeaway before we finish up. You just jump in Sales Navigator if you've got it. You come up with your target list, and there's a feature, and it'll show you your first degree. How are you connected to that person within your target account? And then you can go, well, how well do I know that person that's connected to them? And if I know them well, just ask for a referral, right? Because referrals will always convert at a higher rate. And that's just a very little quick hack that they can do to generate a list, to reduce that sort of tension on, am I reaching out to a cold list, right? I'm at least getting referrals into that list. Yeah,
nice. Luigi, thank you so much, mate. How can people get in touch with you, follow along with what you're doing? Where would you direct them?
I'm pretty active on LinkedIn, as you know, Sean. Just jump on LinkedIn, type in Luigi. Not many others come up, which is really good. And then check out the Scalable Growth podcast. This is the type of content I talk about every single week. We break down, and then obviously my website, growthforum.io, we've got a lot of free resources as well for people looking to learn more about sales. So let me know what you think of the episode. Let me know if you enjoyed it. I'd love to hear from you on LinkedIn.
Absolutely. That's beautiful, mate. Thank you, folks. If you enjoyed today, I would suggest, could you do a couple of things? Do one of three things. Like, starting point, subscribe on your podcast app so you make sure that more people get access to it. 2, leave us a review. Or 3, share this episode with Luigi, with someone who you know who'd love it, who probably needs it right now. And that would mean the world to Luigi and to myself and to our team. But if you are listening to this and you are you're one of the people finding it really challenging at the moment, and the market's kind of changing under your feet, this is probably the best time to be actually relooking at strategy for the next 3 years, because it's not about hibernating and just crawling into the dark and then waiting for it all to go away and then now I'll kind of rebuild after that. This is the time to reposition, refocus, prioritize, make sure that in the next couple of years you're actually focused on the right things, so that as the tailwinds return, which they always do, you come out stronger, better, more competitive, and more able to scale. And to do that, you need a kick-ass growth strategy. And that's exactly why I'm going to be teaching founders like you in our inaugural Scale-Ups, it's a hard word to say, inaugural, Scale-Ups Roadmap course, where I'm going to be sharing the methodology that I developed after generating $100 million in revenue in 4 companies over 8 years with my teams, to make sure that you've got a fit-for-purpose strategy for the next 3 years. The doors are opening on that program in May for the very first time, and they're only going to open 3 times a year. So if you want to find out about it, you can go to scaleupsroadmap.com.au. Apologies for the relatively crap landing page. There is a new website coming pretty soon, but it's fine. You can stick your name on the wait list and you'll get all the details as they come. But please join me in thanking our guest today, Luigi Prestinenzi. Sorry, mate. Pretty close. You've been listening to the Scale Ups podcast. I'm Sean Steele, and look forward to chatting to you next week. Thanks, Luigi.
Thanks.
G'day everyone, just a couple of quick things before you go. If you have questions that you'd love myself or an upcoming guest to tackle about challenges that you're facing in scaling your business, please just jump straight on the website, scaleupspodcast.com. You can record your message straight from your mobile by hitting the button on the right-hand side of the page, or you can just email them the old-fashioned way, questions@scaleupspodcast.com. And just a quick reminder, nothing we spoke about today constitutes financial or business advice. If you are considering making big decisions in your business, seek out a professional who can look at your situation in detail and make sure you're getting sound, personalised advice. Thanks for listening. Look forward to being back in your podcast feed next week.